Good to see you all here again, and thank you again. Those that you walked in late, I saw a couple of parents from the Worcester Public School walk in. Thank you for being here again. And my next speaker, I have to pronounce his name right because I didn't on the radio the other day, is Ted Rebarber. Is that good? Okay, good. Okay. Okay. This is the whole language speaking. This is kind of going to be the central joke of this whole thing now. And my mother's here, so she can go into stories about that. Okay, Ted is the CEO of Accountability Works from 2001 to the present. It's a nonprofit organization dedicated to assisting states, schools, parents, and reform-minded organizations in implementing high-performance accountability in assessment systems. He is the lead author on National Costs of Aligning States and Localities to the Common Core Standards. Ted was previously co-founder of the School of Management company serving disadvantaged students in 10 states. He was in the United States Department of Educational Research Division that supported state standards. He is also a member of the Vanderbilt Institute for Public Policy Studies and a research associate. Did I get that right? If you can see the scribbled notes between Ted and I, we did that together. So now I want to introduce my next speaker. Thank you.
It's a great turnout. It's good to be here. I do want to indicate that I used to be at Vanderbilt Institute for Public Policy Studies. I'm no longer there. But before I talk about the issues that we've studied with Common Core and the implications of that, I want to just highlight a couple of things that regarding what Sandy mentioned, which is she described the success of Massachusetts as a result of a lot of hard work under your current academic standards, or your academic standards before Common Core. And where did that put Massachusetts relative to other leading nations in math and science, because they've done these international studies. And many of you may be aware of this, but maybe not all. That is very different. Massachusetts is near the top as compared to other countries. That is very different from where the country as a whole is. In most of these studies, when they look at just the developed countries, the United States tends to be towards the bottom as a whole. When they include non-developed or less developed countries, then they can say we're kind of in the middle, because we're better than most of the undeveloped countries. And so then they can say it's sort of mediocre, it's not terrible. But that's where the US performance is. And so Massachusetts' performance really stands out. And Massachusetts' performance improved not only on the state assessment, the MCAS, but it was documented, it was demonstrated to improve on other independent assessments that are not being used for accountability here. So no one can say, well, they talked to these other tests, and so those are sort of distorted results. On the National Assessment of Educational Progress, Massachusetts, as Sandy mentioned, has been near the top, or at the top, among all the states, most of the states participating in that, among all the states in the US. And then, of course, on the TIMS, the international studies. So Massachusetts' results are really head and shoulders above just about every other state. And that's important to realize, because one of the reasons, one of the justifications that's been used for Common Core is because a lot of other states have not shown that kind of progress. They have, even some of the states with very good standards, comparable, some would say, to Massachusetts, like California, have had difficulty actually meeting, having their students meet those standards. And a lot of states really have pretty weak or just poorly written standards. And they haven't seen those kind of results. So those have been the arguments in a lot of these states, and there are reasons to question the solution offered. But at least those are the arguments for adopting Common Core in a lot of states. And I'll just leave it to you to think about whether that really applies here. Because each state should be making its own decisions about what makes sense, what is best for your children, your schools, and your teachers. So that's a little bit of a national context. we did analysis of the cost of implementing Common Core. It was a national analysis, and we found, I'll give you the end result first, and I'll talk about how we did it. We found that over a 7-year period, with most of the costs up front, the cost nationally would be about $15.8 billion. And that's not to actually meet the standards, that's just to point, to align the system towards the Common Core standards. And that's a significant cost to a lot of communities. Now, the way Common Core was pitched initially was that states were encouraged, and this was back during the recent recession. A lot of states and communities were fiscally strapped and looking for any funding that could be found to just preserve what they had, or at least cut less than they otherwise would have had to. And under the federal stimulus package that was supposed to restart the economy, a fair amount of that was used as a carrot, as an incentive by the federal government to states to adopt Common Core. So for states, if states are willing to sign on, there was the suggestion, and some states did receive some of this funding under the stimulus grant. So there's a real incentive. And one of the things we found was that when we looked at it, we thought, well, first let's look at what if states who adopted Common Core or said they're committed to it, what are their cost analyses? What are the studies that they did before they adopted Common Core? And what did they find in their states for what it would cost? And we were pretty shocked to find that very few states did any kind of analysis of the cost, of the feasibility. Unfortunately, Massachusetts was one of those. There was no cost analysis. A number of states adopted Common Core before they were even finalized. And some adopted the same day they were finalized, with no public hearings or very little public awareness. And I've been to a number of states where people are trying to find out more about Common Core, because now it's coming up. It's supposed to be implemented fully. The national tests that are the hammer are supposed to be implemented next year, next spring. So people are starting to become aware of this, and they're wondering, why didn't we know about this before? Why was so little information provided? Now some people in the schools have heard about it, because some of the schools have moved forward to implement it. But in the broader communities, and a lot of parents, there's really a lot less information about it. And so we were surprised at how few did cost analysis. But there were a few that did. And we looked at those. And our approach was to try to do what we call an empirically based approach. Because these states that did look at cost, in their case, they had a couple of decades of experience implementing standards. And so they could look at what it cost them then. They didn't just take those as automatically going to be the same. They made adjustments in some cases. We looked at states that were supporters of Common Core, like California, Washington State. We looked at cost analysis from states that weren't, like Texas. And there weren't a lot. There were really about 4 that did serious cost analyses. And we adjusted the assumptions based on credible data from the National Center of Education Statistics at the U.S. Department of Ed, from all the states and nationwide data, and came up with these assumptions. And we found costs in 4 main areas. One is in testing. Now that's going to vary by state. Some states already have fairly high testing costs. But some states are definitely going to see increasing costs. And I have to say, though, that nobody really knows how much the testing will cost on Common Core, because the 2 national testing consortia funded by the U.S. Department of Ed, the Obama administration, they got over $360 million to develop what are supposed to be breakthrough new assessments. They would not commit to how much they would charge states to use their tests. And so they put in these grants, and the consortium that Massachusetts joined, PARC, they put in their approved grant proposal, the final version is approved, estimates ranging between $17 a student and $50 a student. So what that basically means is we have no idea how much it's going to cost. If your estimate is several orders of magnitude of the lower estimate, the high end, then you really just don't know. They did detail out a $32 student cost, but they said we're not sure that's going to be what we do. And since they've been trying to develop these tests, they've actually had to ratchet back some of their ambitious plans and claims about all this groundbreaking stuff to try to meet the timeline and meet the budget and make it affordable for states. So some of the initial goals have been ratcheted back. But they're still, even today, they have not, neither of the two big consortium have promised or committed to the states, here's what it will cost per student. So we use some relatively low estimates for their costs, but there's a lot of reasons to think they're going to have trouble. And I'll just mention one. PARC, one of the reasons they can try to keep their costs manageable is because they group a lot of states using the same assessment, and they can spread their costs over a large number. And so one of their two big states is Florida. And Florida announced in the last couple months that they are thinking of leaving PARC, partly because of the cost and partly because of another major area of cost that we found, which is technology costs. Because these assessments are supposed to be online. And we looked at states that, not for Common Core, but previously, a couple of states looked at the feasibility of fully online state testing, which requires a relatively compact window of time to ensure test security. You have enough computers, and not all the computers in a school can be used for this. The computers that are in an environment that can be secure, to prevent cheating and so forth, that you have adequate infrastructure. And so we included that cost, and we found out one was one of the largest, out of 15.8 billion, about 6.8 billion of that is technology costs, including some increases on ongoing costs, and staffing and support and so forth. And so these are some very real costs. Two other areas were professional development to train teachers and orient them, even using train-the-trainer models, and textbooks and instructional materials, which would have to be updated a lot faster than the normal spread out cycle, where they can just replace a few textbooks each year. They would have to move up some of those costs to get it all done prior to next year, before. So we found costs that are one-time, first year, and then ongoing annual costs. And the total, which we think is relatively conservative, is 15.8 billion. And we were criticized fairly soon after we announced it by another group that did their own cost analysis, the Fordham Institute, and they've been one of the strongest backers of Common Core. By the way, the Fordham Institute is a group that has done reviews of state standards, and even this group found that the Massachusetts standards that you had before were at least slightly better. I think reality is significantly better, but even one of the strongest advocates of Common Core admits that the Massachusetts standards you had before were at least somewhat better than Common Core. And so Fordham Institute performed what we call, they didn't call this, but we call a hope-based budget compared to our empirically-based budget, where we try to look at state experience. And they said, well, states and districts can be very creative, and they included no costs for technology. Zero. Because they said, well, technology can benefit lots of other things in the school environment. Well, that's true. That doesn't mean it doesn't cost anything. And so Florida gave one of the reasons for why they may actually delay implementing Common Core and possibly get out of one of the testing consortia is the very large technology cost, which if the states don't fund it, will fall on the districts to find money to fund it. And one of the other arguments of the Fordham Institute was that, well, there might be some additional costs that states or localities have to find money for, but a lot of the costs, or at least a significant portion, they could redirect from some of their current expenditures to implementing Common Core. And so they said those don't count because they can just redirect from funds. And our view is these are all real costs. And if you're not going to spend money, if you're going to spend that money on Common Core, it means you can't spend it on some of these other things, which hopefully some of that was useful, that was benefiting the students. So they're very real costs, whether you have to add more money through taxes or others, or partly have to redirect some expenditures. And so in the end, what we recommended, the bottom line was that states and communities should do their own cost analyses, right? feasibility analysis before they jump in with both feet, implementing Common Core. It seems like common sense. And it shouldn't be just a cost analysis, it should be a cost-benefit analysis, where you weigh the cost with what are the benefits? Are you getting much better standards? Is there some real benefit to all this? And so we think that's the bottom line. We did a national analysis. We have illustrative figures at the state level, but we're encouraging communities to come up with their own analyses to focus on this. This is going to affect all your students. In many states, it's also going to affect homeschoolers, because some of the national standardized tests are aligning to Common Core, and many states require homeschoolers to administer the national standardized test. In some states where they have private school choice, it's going to affect private schools. And so we're encouraging states to look at this. And in closing, one of the arguments that's been made now that more people are finding out about Common Core and starting to look into it, is this is a done deal. It's no point fighting this, no point studying it. It's going to happen. Might as well just make the best of it. And of course, people who want this to happen, and I would say I'm a skeptic. I'm not going to say any state wouldn't benefit from it, but I also don't think states should be pushed into it through funding or sanctions from the federal government, and the states ought to make their own decisions. But the argument that this is inevitable has already been proven false. Indiana recently adopted legislation through an alliance between parents who were finding out more about this and said, we want to know more about this before this can come to our kids, and teachers' unions. Unions in that state who decided, why are we doing this? Indiana was also one of those states that had among the best standards in the country. And so they're looking, we're going to spend all this time retraining, redirecting, buying new books, and is this any better than what we have now, or is it actually worse? What's the cost benefit? So I think everyone needs to look at it, teachers, parents, and make that judgment. And Indiana's not alone. Utah pulled out of one of the national testing consortia. Other states, I believe it was Alabama, did. And so there's a lot of people taking a first look at this, not another look, but a first look. And I encourage everyone here to do the same.